On the corner of Fifth Avenue and 33rd Street, Manhattan once bore witness to a palace that redefined American hospitality, the Waldorf Astoria. At its zenith, it was the largest hotel in the world, 17 stories of German Renaissance grandeur, over 1,000 rooms, and Peacock Alley stretching 300 feet, connecting twin towers not built from collaboration, but from family rivalry. Millionaires paraded through marble corridors, presidents signed legislation in private suites, European royalty dined beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Prague. Here, wealth had a face and ambition a home. But behind the gold leaf and Vermont marble, a darker story unfolded. Worker deaths were swept under the rug, guest suicides quietly erased, labor strikes crushed. The grandest hotel in America was built on vengeance and maintained through exploitation. Fifth Avenue in the 1880s was the apex of American wealth. The stretch from Washington Square to Central Park housed families whose mansions occupied entire blocks. Brownstone facades gleamed on both sides. Private carriages crowded the streets during calling hours. To live here required more than money. It demanded pedigree, social connections, and acceptance into a world governed by unspoken rules. At the center of this world was the Astor family. Their fortune began with John Jacob Astor, a German immigrant who arrived in America in 1784 with 7 flutes and $40. From fur trading to shrewd Manhattan real estate investments, he amassed a fortune that made him the wealthiest man in the nation by 1848.
His grandson, William Backhouse Astor Sr., inherited and expanded the empire, controlling hundreds of buildings and thousands of tenants, living in cramped tenements that ensured a steady, unremarkable income. Upon his death in 1875, the family legacy passed to 2 sons, John Jacob Astor III, who took the bulk of the fortune, and William Waldorf Astor, who inherited wealth but little authority. Both married into established families, securing heirs to continue the dynasty. New York society in the 1880s operated under rules stricter than law. Mrs. Caroline Sherman Horn Astor, the widow of William Backhouse Astor Sr., crowned herself queen of the social order. Known simply as Mrs. Astor, she dictated who belonged in the elite circle and who was excluded into oblivion. Ward Mallister, her advisor, helped craft the famous 400, a precise list of those who mattered, a number allegedly defined by her ballroom's capacity. Banking families, railroad magnates, and old Dutch names mingled with newly minted fortunes, but inclusion required more than wealth. Lineage, conduct, and Mrs. Astor's approval were paramount. William Waldorf Astor never forgave his aunt for claiming the title Mrs. Astor. His wife, he believed, had an equal right. To outsiders, the dispute seemed petty. Within the family, it was a battle of precedence and dominance. Born into unimaginable privilege in 1848, William Waldorf Astor attended Columbia Law, traveled Europe, and cultivated tastes for Italian art and English literature. He briefly served in the New York State Assembly and later as U.S. Minister to Italy, where the culture and history of Rome offered solace from Manhattan's superficiality.
When he returned in 1885, he found a city transformed. Streets crowded with immigrants, social events dull and tedious, and worst of all, his Aunt Caroline continued to reign, presenting herself as the unchallenged queen of society from her mansion at 355th Avenue. William Waldorf's own residence at 338th Avenue sat in the shadow of her influence, a daily reminder of power denied and prestige contested. His response would reshape Manhattan itself, giving birth to a hotel that became both a monument to ambition and a symbol of vendetta. The Waldorf Astoria was more than luxury. It was a theater of wealth, power, and rivalry. Every marble column, every chandelier, Every lavish suite bore witness to a city in transformation, a city that celebrated opulence while concealing sorrow, conflict, and ambition behind every gilded door. This is the story of ambition, family strife, and the dark underbelly of Gilded Age glamour, told in the corridors of Manhattan's most legendary hotel. Every day, William Waldorf Astor watched from his mansion as Caroline's carriages glided up Fifth Avenue, delivering visitors eager for her approval. Each season, she orchestrated the social calendar, her influence unquestioned, while his own wife remained perpetually secondary. The feud simmered quietly at first. Remarks about the vulgarity of American society, mutterings about the superiority of European culture, investments in English estates, and prolonged stays abroad. By 1890, William Waldorf had made a decision. He would leave New York for England, where titles and ancestry mattered more than Caroline Astor's guest lists. But before departing, he would leave a message that the city and his aunt would never forget. His mansion at 338 Fifth Avenue occupied prime land. The neighborhood was changing. Commerce crept north from lower Manhattan, transforming streets once reserved for carriages and social calls into thoroughfares of commerce. William Waldorf announced his intention to demolish the family home and build a hotel, not a modest inn, but a grand commercial palace designed to upend Fifth Avenue's social order. This was more than ambition, it was deliberate defiance. Caroline had built her power on exclusivity. Her Fifth Avenue sanctuary was meant for the chosen few. The hotel would invite strangers, commerce, and noise, intruding into the heart of her carefully curated world. Guests would overlook her garden, walk corridors without introductions, and occupy rooms that belonged, in her mind, to nobody but the elite. Caroline protested privately, but William Waldorf proceeded publicly. He hired Henry Janeway Hardenberg, the architect behind the Dakota Apartments, whose work had proven that elegance and profitability could coexist even in unfashionable neighborhoods. Now, Hardenberg would be tasked with a far more ambitious undertaking, a hotel that mirrored Caroline's social standards, yet operated on commercial terms, rendering her exclusivity obsolete. Construction began in 1891. Caroline observed the excavation of foundations, the clamor of construction, and the symbolic transformation of her street. By 1892, walls rose, steel frameworks gleaming against the Manhattan skyline. The building would be called the Waldorf, named after the German town from which the first American Astor had emigrated. When it opened in March 1893, Caroline faced a choice: stay in her mansion next to a commercial intruder or retreat. She chose retreat, relocating uptown to 65th Street and Fifth Avenue. Publicly, it appeared as a graceful shift toward quieter environs. Privately, the truth was undeniable. William Waldorf Astor had won. Yet the family feud was far from over. Caroline's son, John Jacob Astor IV, was not ready to concede. If his cousin could erect a hotel, he could build a greater one. The mansion his mother abandoned, now a valuable lot adjacent to the Waldorf, became the site of his audacious plan. The Astoria would rise taller, grander, and more ornate. Two Astors, once bound by blood, now competed openly for prestige, dominance, and guests on the same city block. The rivalry began even before ground was broken. John Jacob Astor IV hired the same architect, Henry Janeway Hardenberg, ensuring the two structures would share stylistic continuity while embodying distinct ambitions. Hardenberg watched from her new mansion as demolition crews tore down her former home at 355 Fifth Avenue in 1895. The street she once ruled was transformed, her private dominion replaced by steel, marble, and ambition.
Hardenberg employed German Renaissance revival for both towers, a style gaining popularity in Manhattan during the 1880s and 90s. The aesthetic projected solidity, sophistication, and European tradition, an illusion of history applied to brand-new constructions. Through this clash, Fifth Avenue was transformed. Carriages gave way to bustling guests, exclusive salons to grand lobbies. The Astors had weaponized architecture and commerce to settle a personal vendetta, leaving behind buildings that defined the skyline and the city's social history for generations. This was not just a story of wealth, it was a story of ambition, rivalry, and the human desire to leave a mark that even time cannot erase. The Astoria would rise taller than its predecessor, 17 stories of steel and stone, deliberately overshadowing the Waldorf. From the street, the facades spoke of both power and elegance. Rusticated limestone anchored the lower floors like a fortress, while smooth ashlar and decorative terracotta panels above lightened the structure without sacrificing grandeur. Copper cornices crowned the towers, destined to age into a soft green patina. Bay windows and balconies punctuated vertical lines, softening the architecture yet asserting dominance. Together, the two buildings read as related but distinct, rival siblings in stone and steel. The question of connection tormented the Astor cousins. William Waldorf, now residing permanently in London, oversaw his investment through intermediaries, far removed from the city he had once sought to reshape. John Jacob Astor IV remained in New York, supervising every brick and beam. Neither wanted the towers to merge fully. The rivalry was the point. Yet business logic clashed with ego. Separate operations were inefficient. Guests could be shared, services consolidated, and costs reduced if the hotels functioned as a single property.
The solution was Peacock Alley, a 300-foot corridor at ground level linking the Waldorf to the Astoria. The passage would serve as both conduit and stage. Society's elite would parade through it each evening, displaying jewelry, gowns, and status for all to see. Every visitor entering either hotel would traverse this shared space, rendering the buildings inseparable in practice, even as they remained distinct in name. The corridor embodied compromise through spectacle, competition transformed into theater. Construction had advanced with remarkable speed. Ground broke in 1891. By 1892, the steel skeleton of the Waldorf towered above Manhattan, exterior walls nearly complete, interiors underway. Hotels of this scale usually took years. Here, aggressive scheduling and a vast labor force compressed timelines. Immigrant workers formed the backbone of the effort. Irish stonemasons sculpted limestone, Italian tile setters crafted intricate mosaics, German carpenters executed woodwork, Polish laborers hauled materials and dug foundations. Crafts and nationalities were strictly divided, informal boundaries enforced by unions and contractors. Safety, however, was negligible. Wooden scaffolds swayed 100 feet above the street, ropes straining under weight. When a worker fell from the 12th floor in August 1892, construction paused for less than an hour. No records were kept, no compensation followed. Lives became invisible sacrifices to progress. Inside, dangers persisted. Lime plaster burned exposed skin. Lead-based paints caused tremors and cognitive decline. Electricians risked fatal shocks on experimental wiring. Every modern convenience carried a human cost.
Material scale was extraordinary. Vermont marble, the same quarried for the Library of Congress, lined public corridors. Mahogany from Honduras covered private rooms. Oak floors came from Pennsylvania and upstate New York. Over 5 million bricks shaped walls and supports. 20,000 cubic feet of marble adorned grand halls. 300 tons of steel framed the towers, enabling heights masonry alone could never sustain. Every element testified to ambition, wealth, and the era's obsession with monumentalism. Finally, on March 14, 1893, the Waldorf opened. 500 guests attended the inaugural banquet, a glittering display of opulence and excess. 16 courses unfolded, oysters and fish, meats and game, elaborate desserts. Wines from France and Germany accompanied each dish. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished corridors, and polished floors reflected the soft glow of gaslights. Guests paraded through Peacock Alley, their jewels and silks illuminating the marble as the city watched. It was a triumph not just of architecture, but of ambition, rivalry, and spectacle. The Waldorf had become more than a hotel. It was a statement of wealth, power, family rivalry, and the relentless drive to shape Manhattan itself. Behind every column, every staircase, and every opulent suite lay a story of ambition, sacrifice, and human cost. The Astors' personal vendetta had transformed a neighborhood. Fifth Avenue was no longer a quiet enclave of old money. It had become a theater of commerce, prestige, and spectacle, where steel and stone enshrined both triumph and human toil.
The hotel employed over 400 staff members, from bellhops and maids to cooks, waiters, doormen, maintenance crews, and specialized attendants. Department heads reported to managers, who reported to the general director. Uniforms denoted rank and role, projecting seamless service while concealing the intricate orchestration behind the scenes. Guests experienced effortless luxury. Behind the walls, every movement required precision, discipline, and hierarchy. Profitability followed immediately. Standard rooms rented for $3 per night, approximately $90 today, while suites commanded premium rates. Restaurants, bars, and private functions generated additional revenue, ensuring the hotel's operation thrived. Within 6 months, the Waldorf was nearly at capacity, even in the winter season. John Jacob Astor IV, watching the Waldorf's immediate success, accelerated his own plans. Construction on the Astoria began in 1895, deliberately designed to surpass the Waldorf in every measurable way: more rooms, higher ceilings, and larger public spaces. Where the Waldorf had impressed, the Astoria would overwhelm. Its steel frame climbed rapidly throughout 1896 and into 1897, dominating the city block and visible from miles away. Hardenberg coordinated the connector corridor as the Astoria rose, ensuring Peacock Alley would link the two hotels seamlessly. The passage transformed 2 rival towers into a single massive operation, while preserving their distinct identities. When the Astoria opened in November 1897, the 2 hotels operated as one, the Waldorf Astoria, the largest hotel in the world.
Managing such an empire required unprecedented organization. George Bolt, appointed proprietor in 1893, assumed command over both towers after the Astoria's completion. Bolt brought experience from Philadelphia's Bellevue Hotel, where he had earned a reputation for exacting standards and innovative service. Under his direction, staff numbers, operations, and guest experience were coordinated with precision, creating a flawless illusion of effortless luxury. The combined property was a triumph of architecture, engineering, and ambition. Peacock Alley was more than a corridor. It was a stage, a social theater where New York's elite could parade in jewels and finery, their status displayed for all to see. Every marble staircase, gilded cornice, and crystal chandelier whispered wealth, innovation, and family rivalry transformed into artistry.
The Waldorf Astoria embodied the zenith of the Gilded Age, a monument not merely to comfort, but to power, prestige, and spectacle. It elevated hospitality into performance and architecture into drama. Each room, hallway, and dining hall spoke of ambition, competition, and human ingenuity. Behind the glittering surface lay immense human effort, labor, and sacrifice, yet none of it diminished the illusion. For the guests, the city's most luxurious hotel offered more than accommodation. It offered a theater in which wealth, status, and elegance were on permanent display, a symbol of an era that would never be forgotten. George Bolt brought vision and discipline to the Waldorf Astoria, transforming it from an impressive facility into an institution that defined luxury hospitality for a generation. By 1898, the workforce had expanded to over 1,000 employees, each operating under meticulously detailed protocols. Manuals dictated every action, from the precise angle at which bellhops tilted their caps to the exact way napkins should be folded. Bolt believed consistency created the illusion of effortlessness. When every gesture followed a script, guests perceived flawless service, unaware of the rigid systems producing it.
The kitchen alone employed over 100 staff: cooks, sous chefs, pastry specialists, butchers, vegetable preparers, dishwashers, and runners working in nearly an acre of basement kitchens. Industrial ovens lined one wall, while early refrigeration units preserved meats and dairy, a technological marvel for 1897. Separate stations handled French, German, and American regional cuisines, reflecting both practical efficiency and social hierarchy. French cuisine occupied the pinnacle of status, with chefs commanding the highest wages and respect. Yet labor conditions remained brutal. Shifts often began at 5 a.m. and stretched past midnight during peak periods. Temperatures near the ovens exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit even in winter. Burns, lacerations, and scalds were daily hazards. Complaints were rarely tolerated. Workers could be replaced within hours. Front-of-house staff endured a different set of pressures. Waiters and porters stood for 12 to 14-hour shifts, taking only brief, irregular breaks. Meals were often scavenged from kitchen scraps, consumed standing in service corridors. Wages barely covered the cost of rent in the crowded tenements where most employees lived. Tips from wealthy patrons became essential income, fostering competition among staff for the most generous assignments. Racial and gender hierarchies strictly defined roles. Black employees were restricted to porters, cleaners, and kitchen assistants, barred from serving in main dining rooms or working at the front desk. Asian workers faced similar exclusions. Women, primarily employed as maids or laundresses, earned roughly half the wages of male counterparts. Their work carried additional hazards, including exposure to hot irons, boiling water, and physical exhaustion, as well as endemic sexual harassment. Reporting misconduct often resulted in dismissal rather than protection, creating a near-feudal power imbalance. Despite harsh conditions, employment at the Waldorf Astoria carried prestige within immigrant communities. Association with the hotel signaled competence and experience, often opening doors to better positions elsewhere. The institution functioned as a national training ground, producing managers and staff who would carry Fifth Avenue service standards to hotels across the United States. Technical operations were no less demanding. The heating plant consumed 10 tons of coal daily during winter months. Stokers labored in 120-degree Fahrenheit conditions, shoveling fuel into furnaces that powered radiators on every floor. The work aged men rapidly, destroying lungs and joints. Many left the job within years, either through injury, disability, or exhaustion. Some perished on the job, succumbing to heat stroke or respiratory failure.
The laundry operation processed thousands of sheets, towels, and tablecloths daily. Women labored over steaming wash tubs, heavy irons, and endless folding tables, confined to the building's least desirable spaces. Their hands blistered and backs ached, yet they maintained the flawless linens expected by guests accustomed to perfection. Every corridor gleamed, every dining room set with immaculate tableware, every bedroom prepared with meticulous attention, an outward reflection of luxury made possible only through human toil. Every detail of the Waldorf Astoria was designed to impress, from the polished marble halls to the crystal chandeliers, from electric lighting to private bathrooms, yet each luxury carried a hidden cost. Behind the velvet curtains, behind the effortless smiles of uniformed staff, were hours of unrelenting labor, hierarchy and forced compliance, and human sacrifice. The hotel's brilliance depended not only on architecture and design, but on the relentless discipline and endurance of those who operated it.
The Waldorf Astoria, at its height, was more than a hotel. It was a theater of wealth and ambition, a spectacle where Gilded Age grandeur met human endurance. Each guest experienced comfort and elegance as though it were effortless. In truth, every gleaming surface, every polished fixture, and every perfectly laid table reflected a network of labor, sacrifice, and invisible hierarchies that made Fifth Avenue's crown jewel possible. Humidity approached 100%. Heat rivaled the boiler room below. Women fainted regularly, and management kept smelling salts on hand to revive them, ensuring work continued without pause. The laundry operated around the clock, workers rotating through 8-hour shifts that felt endless. Every elevator required constant staffing. Operators spent 6-day weeks riding the cars up and down hundreds of times per shift. The monotony was numbing, the confined shafts oppressive during summer heat. Legs swelled, backs ached, and chronic injuries accumulated. Pay was slightly better than average service work, but the toll on the body was predictable. Young men endured the labor for a few years, only to move on or become incapable of continuing. The hotel's infrastructure demanded similar devotion. Power generation, water pumping, refrigeration, and waste removal each required dedicated crews working in hidden spaces. These employees were invisible by design, entering through side doors, never touching the Fifth Avenue entrances that welcomed guests. The Waldorf Astoria presented an image of effortless luxury. Behind it, an army of laborers maintained systems, polished surfaces, and immaculate rooms.
Construction had been equally perilous. The Astoria reached 17 stories at a time when such height was extraordinary. Men balanced 50-pound loads of bricks and mortar atop scaffolding swaying in the wind, with no safety equipment to protect them from inevitable falls. At least 4 deaths were documented during construction, though contemporary records suggest the actual toll was higher. Bodies were removed quickly, and work resumed without interruption. Each fallen worker was replaced by a stream of men desperate for employment. The materials themselves presented hazards. Asbestos, celebrated for fire resistance, was handled bare-handed, releasing fibers that would later cause lung disease. Lead paint coated walls in every room, exposing painters to tremors and cognitive decline. Mercury compounds used in mirror silvering released toxic vapors, endangering craftsmen's health. Human sacrifice remained invisible beneath the glittering surfaces of the towers. When the Astoria opened in November 1897, its debut surpassed even the Waldorf's spectacular inaugural event 4 years prior. Over 800 guests attended the banquet, moving through the crowd alongside host John Jacob Astor IV and his wife, Ava. The menu featured 20 courses, served over 6 hours, paired with wines dating back to the 1840s. Every detail proclaimed opulence, wealth, and social prestige.
Peacock Alley, the hyphen connecting the towers, became operational immediately. The corridor, lined with mirrors and coffered ceilings, multiplied the space visually. Gas lamps and ornate fixtures cast a warm glow, flattering the complexions of society women parading through each evening. At 7 o'clock, guests from both towers dressed in evening attire and walked the corridor in a ritual of visibility. Each pause to greet acquaintances or be seen by others reinforced the social theater, blending architecture and performance into one seamless spectacle. The operational merger justified the initial family rivalry. Guests could be directed to whichever building had availability, while services were shared between the towers, eliminating redundant staff and increasing efficiency. The combined property boasted over 1,400 rooms, unmatched in the city, capable of hosting conventions, gala events, and gatherings that no competing hotel could accommodate. Every element, from structural steel to decorative marble, from electric lighting to hydraulic elevators, required labor hidden from view. Men and women worked in basement kitchens, laundry rooms, boiler spaces, and side entrances, sustaining the illusion of perfection. The grandeur experienced by guests, the gleaming floors, sparkling chandeliers, polished elevators, and impeccable service depended entirely on the endurance, skill, and sacrifice of these invisible workers. The Waldorf Astoria was more than the sum of its architecture and amenities. It was a stage for the Gilded Age, a theater where wealth, spectacle, and social hierarchy played out daily. Peacock Alley, the grand ballrooms and suites told a story of opulence, while the hidden labor beneath revealed a different narrative, one of human toil, risk, and exploitation that made effortless luxury possible. In this interplay between visible grandeur and invisible labor, the hotel became a monument not only to ambition and competition, but also to the lives sacrificed to sustain an illusion of perfection that would define luxury hospitality for generations. The Waldorf Astoria was more than a marvel of architecture and luxury. It was the largest hotel in the world, a distinction it held until 1909. Yet behind its gilded halls and glittering ballrooms lurked shadows that the polished marble and crystal chandeliers could not hide. The first documented suicide occurred in June of 1898, just 7 months after the Astoria opened. A textile merchant from Philadelphia checked in under his own name, paying in advance for 3 nights. On the second day, a maid found him dead in his bed, an empty bottle of laudanum on the nightstand. The coroner ruled it an accident. No investigation followed. The room was cleaned, the body removed through a service entrance, and by evening, a new guest occupied the suite. This pattern repeated silently over decades. At least 40 guests died under circumstances suggesting self-inflicted death, though the actual total was likely far higher. Management had clear incentives to minimize publicity. Newspaper reporters could be persuaded to omit details. Coroners could issue ambiguous rulings. Families desperate to avoid scandal often cooperated. Among those who noticed, the Waldorf Astoria developed a quiet reputation as a place for final, private departures. Absolute privacy, discretion, and inattention offered a grim convenience. A guest could refuse room service, display a "Do Not Disturb" sign, and remain undiscovered for days. Windows overlooked narrow air shafts or streets far below. Furniture and gas lines provided tragically effective tools.
In October 1903, A woman registered under an obviously false name and carried only a small bag to a 10th-floor room. The desk clerk noted her agitation but said nothing. 2 days later, a guest reported a gunshot. Security entered with a master key and found her dead on the floor, a revolver at her side. No note explained her presence or her actions. Police investigated for less than an hour, removed the body, cleaned the room, and normal operations resumed. Some deaths involved prominent figures, though newspapers rarely identified them. In 1907, a former congressman from the Midwest spent his final night in a Waldorf Historia suite before throwing himself from a 12th-floor window. Official reports described it as an accidental fall. His family claimed he had lost his balance while leaning out for fresh air. The window, with a waist-high sill and inward-opening design, made such an accident improbable, yet the official story stood. For men of his social stature, alternative explanations were unthinkable. The hotel also bore witness to violence beyond suicide. In January 1911, a stockbroker named Edward Stone checked in with a woman who was not his wife. His estranged spouse, having suspected the affair for months, hired a private detective to follow the couple to the hotel. Arriving unannounced, she confronted Stone in the corridor outside his room and shot him 3 times with a pistol purchased that morning. He died instantly. The ensuing trial became a sensation. The defense argued temporary insanity brought on by betrayal. The prosecution sought murder charges. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed for 18 months, then released.
Throughout the trial, the Waldorf Historia featured prominently. Its corridors, rooms, and discreet entrances were scrutinized. The hotel's role as a haven for clandestine relationships, married men with mistresses, married women with lovers, was discussed openly in court. Staff were trained to see nothing and remember nothing. The veneer of elegance and propriety masked a darker reality. The building facilitated desires and desperation, discretion enforced by both social expectation and institutional protocol. By its very design, the Waldorf Historia encouraged secrecy. Private suites, soundproofed walls, and the labyrinthine network of service corridors allowed guests to disappear from view. Guests moved through a world that appeared perfect, harmonious, and controlled, yet beneath it lay human drama, unrecorded tragedies, clandestine encounters, and the unspoken acknowledgement that luxury could coexist with violence, despair, and desire. The hotel's brilliance rested on these contradictions. It projected wealth, prestige, and refinement to the outside world, while behind the doors, its human stories were far more complicated, often tragic. The Waldorf Historia was not merely a building of bricks and marble. It was a theater of human ambition, secrecy, and mortality, where opulence and darkness existed side by side, shaping the history of New York for decades. At the Waldorf Historia, privacy was a commodity as carefully curated as its marble corridors and crystal chandeliers. Housekeeping waiters knocked once, leaving trays in the hall if guests did not answer. Housekeeping entered only when rooms were definitively vacated. Guests paid not just for a bed or a meal, but for invisibility, discretion, and control over their own space.
Among the hotel's staff, no figure wielded greater influence than Oscar Sheary. Arriving at the Waldorf in 1893, he would remain for 4 decades, universally known as Oscar of the Waldorf. He served as maître d'hôtel, controlling access to the most exclusive dining rooms, orchestrating every detail of seating and service. Where a guest was placed determined reputation. Being acknowledged by Oscar and seated prominently signaled social prominence. Being ignored or relegated near the kitchen marked irrelevance. Oscar also shaped the hotel's culinary identity. He created iconic dishes forever associated with the Waldorf salad, combining apples, celery, and walnuts in mayonnaise atop crisp lettuce. Eggs Benedict, poached eggs on toast with ham and hollandaise, reportedly born from a conversation between Oscar and a hungover guest seeking breakfast. Thousand Island dressing and several other preparations also bore his influence. Yet Oscar's mastery came at a cost. His enforcement of hierarchy verged on authoritarian. French-trained chefs occupied the apex of authority and respect, while immigrant laborers labored at the bottom. Any failure, real or perceived, could result in immediate dismissal or the reduction of shifts. The kitchen staff feared him, and that fear ensured the precision he demanded. Errors could end careers, complaints invited retaliation, and discipline was absolute. The main dining room seated 400 guests, often hosting 2 full seatings per evening. Serving 800 meals within 4 hours required military-level coordination. Waiters carried multiple plates, weaving between tables with the rhythm of a well-rehearsed ballet, appearing unhurried despite the intensity. Tips determined survival. Base wages were minimal. The most desirable tables went to senior staff with proven experience, while new waiters served difficult parties or poor tippers. Competition was fierce. Subtle sabotage, strategic maneuvering, and relentless ambition were everyday tools. Oscar encouraged the rivalry, believing it heightened performance and ensured the hotel's standard of excellence.
Gender segregation dictated the dining experience. Unaccompanied women were confined to the ladies' dining room, forbidden from the main room or the grill. Ostensibly protective, the rule enforced social control. Women without escorts were presumed to be servants, or worse. Racial exclusion was even more rigid. Black guests were turned away regardless of status. Asian guests faced similar restrictions. Policies were unwritten but consistently enforced. Desk clerks claimed rooms were unavailable. Restaurant hosts suggested alternative locations. The message was unambiguous. The Waldorf Astoria was an institution for white elites only. The hotel's influence extended far beyond social decorum. Presidential fundraisers held within the grand ballrooms. Senators and congressmen maintained semi-permanent suites. Foreign diplomats lodged at the hotel when visiting New York. Conversations over dinner influenced decisions affecting millions. Theodore Roosevelt hosted allies, conducted negotiations, and maintained personal suites. William Howard Taft followed similar patterns. Even Woodrow Wilson, though preferring other accommodations, attended events and leveraged the hotel for political strategy. Corporate leaders used the Waldorf Astoria similarly. J.P. Morgan dined weekly, John D. Rockefeller maintained a suite, and Andrew Carnegie hosted charity events. Conversations at the tables could shift markets. Deals were brokered, mergers conceived, partnerships forged. The hotel operated as an unofficial stock exchange where fortunes were made and lost not on trading floors, but across dining tables lined with fine china, brandy decanters, and cigar smoke.
Every detail, the placement of a chair, the gleam of silverware, the rhythm of service, was orchestrated to maintain appearance, control, and status. Behind the glittering public image was a complex machinery of human power, ambition, and discipline. Oscar Cherry's authority, the waiter's relentless precision, and the kitchen staff's fear-fueled obedience combined to produce an experience that seemed effortless, even magical to those who occupied the rooms and corridors of the Waldorf Astoria. The hotel was more than architecture or luxury. It was a stage where power, social hierarchy, and wealth were performed daily. The distinction between service and spectacle blurred. Every meal, every seating, every interaction told a story of control, prestige, and ambition.
In the Waldorf Atoria, mastery of service equaled mastery of social influence, and no one embodied that truth more completely than Oscar of the Waldorf. During the winter season, the Waldorf Astoria dictated New York's social calendar. Debutante balls introduced young women to society in the grand ballroom. Charity galas raised money for carefully approved causes. Private dinner parties allowed the city's elite to gather, shielded from anyone deemed socially unsuitable. Within these walls, boundaries were meticulously enforced. Everyone present belonged, everyone excluded knew they did not. Yet beneath this gleaming surface, the labor that made it all possible remained invisible. Most workers lived in cramped tenements on the Lower East Side or in dense neighborhoods west of 8th Avenue. They traveled to work by elevated trains or on foot when fares were unaffordable. Shifts began before sunrise. Many left in darkness and returned in darkness, seeing family only on rare days off.
Base wages barely covered rent, while tips provided essential supplemental income for front-of-house staff, creating desperate competition that management exploited. Kitchen workers and maintenance staff, receiving no tips, relied solely on wages that scarcely approached subsistence. Borrowing money became routine, from family members, from predatory lenders, from anyone willing to extend credit. Debt was a permanent condition, locking workers into cycles of dependency. Immigrant communities formed internal hierarchies. Irish laborers dominated certain departments, Italians controlled others. German craftsmen held the highest skilled positions, earning slightly more than common laborers. These divisions fostered tension, occasionally erupting into violence. Fights in service corridors or basement workrooms were tolerated so long as guests never witnessed them. Housing conditions mirrored workplace hardship. Multiple families crammed into tenements designed for one. Children slept in shifts on beds still warm from previous occupants. Sanitation was primitive. Water came from shared pumps and courtyards, and toilets served dozens. Disease spread rapidly. Tuberculosis, typhoid, and dysentery claimed lives, yet the hotel kept no records of employee deaths. Workers who fell ill were replaced, their suffering erased as seamlessly as the floors they polished. Women faced uniquely grueling labor. Maids cleaned 10 to 15 rooms per shift, hauling water, carrying linens, emptying chamber pots, and scrubbing floors on hands and knees before modern plumbing reached every room. Within a few years, backs and joints were destroyed. Women in their 30s often moved as though decades older. Hands cracked and bled from exposure to harsh cleaning chemicals, with no gloves, no protective equipment, and no compensation for injuries. Sexual exploitation was systematic. Male guests propositioned maids. Some acquiesced out of financial desperation. Others refused and faced retaliation, with supervisors almost invariably siding with the guest. Male supervisors also demanded sexual favors for better shifts or job security, though compliance guaranteed no long-term protection. Women who resisted risked reduced hours or dismissal. This coercive environment rendered resistance nearly impossible, embedding exploitation into the fabric of the workplace. Children were present too, despite laws prohibiting child labor. Some polished boots in the lobby. Others ran errands for guests, carrying messages and packages for tips. In kitchens, children peeled vegetables or washed dishes. Many were as young as 10, working long hours for pennies, often attending school irregularly or not at all. Their wages could mean the difference between family meals and starvation. Every gleaming surface, every perfectly pressed tablecloth, every elaborate meal represented hours of unseen toil. Luxury was purchased with human endurance. The Waldorf Astoria's success rested on the extraction of labor from those who had no alternatives, no voice, and no power to demand humane conditions. The illusion of effortless opulence was only possible because those who sustained it remained hidden,
overworked and undervalued. Attempts at labor organization were swiftly suppressed. In 1908, waiters met secretly to discuss forming a union. Management discovered the meeting and fired the organizers immediately, sending a clear warning: the system would tolerate no challenge. Behind the glittering ballrooms, the hotel operated as a microcosm of Gilded Age America.
Wealth concentrated at the top, power exercised with precision, and the human cost of luxury meticulously hidden from view. The grandeur experienced by guests, the dazzling lighting, exquisite service, and social theater depended entirely on this foundation of invisible, exploited labor. In the Waldorf Historia, visibility was power, and invisibility was survival. Those who shaped the guest experience remained unseen, their lives constrained by hours, debt, and systemic exploitation. Yet without them, the hotel would have been merely stone and marble, a skeleton devoid of the spectacle, influence, and social authority that made it the most important institution in New York. Every ball, every private dinner, every public debut relied on a workforce whose stories were never acknowledged, yet whose labor was indispensable. The illusion of refinement, discretion, and perfection was bought at the cost of thousands of hidden lives. The lesson of 1908 lingered in the minds of every worker. Organizing meant losing one's livelihood. For years, no one attempted to challenge management again. Conditions continued to deteriorate. In 1912, the hotel kitchen staff wages reduced while simultaneously extending shift lengths, pushing employees toward the breaking point. A small group began meeting secretly, planning a strike. They contacted the Hotel Workers Union, which had recently organized several smaller Manhattan establishments, and union representatives arrived to advise the workers, coordinating action without drawing attention.
The strike began on a crisp Friday morning in March. 60 kitchen workers simply failed to appear for their shifts. Picket lines formed outside the Fifth Avenue entrance, placards in hand, demanding restored wages, 8-hour shifts, and union recognition. Management responded swiftly, hiring replacement workers immediately. Desperation made strikebreakers willing to cross picket lines, and clashes erupted as strikers shouted through the crowd. For 11 days, the drama played out under the gaze of indifferent guests, while police arrested picketers on charges of disturbing the peace. Newspapers painted the strikers as ungrateful immigrants threatening a beloved institution. Prominent patrons sent letters supporting management. By the 11th day, the union conceded defeat. Strikers returned to their previous conditions. Several organizers were never rehired. The message was stark. In the Waldorf Historia, resistance was futile, and workers were entirely replaceable. Complaints ceased. Survival required endurance, obedience, and invisibility. Meanwhile, the hotel's cultural and political influence reached its apex. Every president from Theodore Roosevelt to Woodrow Wilson stayed within its suites. Foreign dignitaries visiting New York regarded it as the only acceptable accommodation. The social season revolved around events held in its ballrooms, making the hotel not merely successful, but synonymous with American luxury. Yet beneath the facade, darkness accumulated. Suicides continued. Labor exploitation intensified. Racial exclusions remained absolute. The hotel's grandeur was inseparable from its monstrosity. Every chandelier, every polished marble column, every meticulously executed meal bore witness not just to wealth and taste, but to suffering and injustice. In April of 1912, tragedy struck beyond the hotel walls. John Jacob Astor IV, architect of the Astoria, perished aboard the Titanic. Traveling with his pregnant second wife, whom he had married following a scandalous divorce, he helped her into a lifeboat before stepping back to allow women and children to board. Last seen on deck, Astor's body was recovered weeks later. He was 47 years old.
His death marked a symbolic turning point. The Gilded Age aristocracy that had built the Waldorf Astoria was passing. The hotel would continue for decades, but the world that created it was fading. New fortunes arose through different means. Social hierarchies shifted. The unchallenged confidence that had allowed the Astors to erect rival palaces on Fifth Avenue was eroding. Despite these changes, the hotel adapted and remained profitable throughout the 1910s, yet the cultural moment had shifted. The Waldorf Astoria embodied a vision of American wealth, one that celebrated excess and accepted inequality as natural. That vision was increasingly difficult to sustain without scrutiny. Prohibition tested the hotel's adaptability. The 18th Amendment, enacted in January 1920, banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Officially, the hotel's bars closed. Wine cellars containing vintages worth millions in modern currency were sealed. Menus no longer listed spirits. Everything appeared compliant. Yet in practice, nothing changed. Within weeks, the Waldorf Astoria became a hub of illicit alcohol distribution. Guests who knew the correct phrasing, who understood the discreet signals, and who had sufficient wealth could still obtain the beverages they desired. The men's cafe, officially limited to coffee and soft drinks, continued to serve stronger libations through covert channels. Orders were placed in code, delivered by trusted staff, and the illusion of legality was maintained. Through strikes, scandals, and legal restrictions, the Waldorf Astoria maintained its image of effortless opulence. Guests remained oblivious to the struggle behind the marble walls, the long hours, the exhausted laborers, the coerced silence of exploited workers. Luxury relied on secrecy, discretion, and the delicate choreography of exploitation. The hotel's success was inseparable from the hardships endured by those who made it possible. It was a palace of contradictions, magnificent yet monstrous, prestigious yet predatory, a symbol of wealth built upon the unseen, suffering hands of countless invisible employees. In this delicate balance of opulence and oppression, the Waldorf Astoria defined an era. Its ballrooms hosted the city's elite. Its suites sheltered presidents, tycoons, and dignitaries. Its kitchens, corridors, and hidden chambers bore witness to labor, fear, and resilience. And despite every strike, every tragedy, and every societal shift, it endured, an enduring monument to the gilded dream and its shadowed costs. At the Waldorf Astoria, discretion was the currency that mattered most. A seemingly innocent request for coffee could mean whiskey. Tea with extra sugar signaled gin. Drinks arrived in teacups and coffee mugs, indistinguishable from legal beverages to any casual observer. Enforcement agents visited occasionally, but the hotel's lawyers ensured operations remained within the narrow boundaries of plausible deniability. Basement spaces, once reserved for storage and mechanical systems, became clandestine salons. Small private dining rooms emerged in areas guests had never seen. These rooms were available only to those willing to pay steep premiums. Alcohol flowed freely, and management feigned ignorance. In truth, the hotel supplied everything, negotiating directly with organized crime networks that controlled New York's bootlegging. Protection payments ensured competitors stayed away. Law enforcement looked the other way, and the illicit operation continued smoothly. The hotel's monthly outlay reached approximately $10,000, over $150,000 in today's currency, passed seamlessly to guests through exorbitant drink prices. The criminal connections, however, invited violence. In October of 1923, a liquor supplier was discovered dead in a service corridor, stabbed multiple times. The body was found after midnight, when guest traffic was minimal and staffing reduced. Management moved swiftly, removing the body and notifying authorities only hours later.
Official investigations concluded that the victim had been killed elsewhere, dumped at the hotel, and no arrests followed. Everyone understood the underlying truth. Murder was a language of the Prohibition underworld, and the hotel's walls transmitted the warning to anyone involved in illicit trade. The Waldorf Atoria hosted the very people who enforced Prohibition and profited from breaking it. Congressmen who had voted for the 18th Amendment dined on Fifth Avenue while sipping illegal whiskey. Judges who sentenced bootleggers entertained in the same ballrooms where illicit alcohol flowed. Hypocrisy was not only accepted, it was expected. Workers witnessed everything, yet silence was enforced. Any discussion of what occurred could lead to dismissal, or worse. Staff served illegal drinks, maintained rooms where prohibited acts occurred, and feigned ignorance, knowing survival depended on secrecy. Suicides continued throughout the 1920s, and the hotel had developed efficient protocols for handling them. If a guest was found dead, a physician certified the death, the family was notified immediately, and hotel staff discreetly assisted in arrangements. Any evidence that might attract unwanted attention was removed, leaving the hotel's reputation unscathed. In March of 1925, a prominent banker shot himself in his suite on the 14th floor. His note detailed financial losses and imminent legal troubles at his institution. Hotel management intercepted the note before authorities arrived, delivering it directly to the banker's law firm, which destroyed it. The official report listed the death as an accidental firearm discharge.
Reputation remained intact, the family shielded, and the bank continued under new leadership. Everyone understood the unspoken arrangement. Discretion preserved mutual interests. The Waldorf Historia also became a hub for financial speculation. The late 1920s created a culture of risk and excess. Traders gathered in public spaces to exchange information, and insider trading, technically illegal, occurred daily over lunch. The covert bar served as a meeting point, a stage for giddy speculation, where fortunes were made through whispered intelligence. Men drank illegal spirits, laughing as they plotted market maneuvers. Optimism was absolute, wealth seemed infinite. The hotel itself became a mirror of the era's hubris, a gilded palace where the rules of the old economy no longer applied. Then came Black Thursday, October 24, 1929. Stock prices plunged catastrophically, panic overtaking the exchanges. Men who had gathered at the Waldorf Historia to celebrate their wealth watched in disbelief as fortunes evaporated in hours. Some fled immediately, attempting to salvage what they could. The city's elite, accustomed to control, faced uncertainty for the first time in decades. The hotel, long a stage for power, discretion, and indulgence, became a silent witness to panic and ruin. Waiters and staff observed the rapid descent, knowing their lives remained unchanged, yet recognizing that the very foundation of their gilded world had fractured. Despite the collapse, operations continued. Illegal drinks were served discreetly, rooms maintained, and guests treated as if the world had not ended. The facade of luxury remained intact, masking the fragility outside. Employees continued their invisible labor, shuttling through service corridors, preparing banquets, and tending to the whims of a clientele whose wealth had been shattered in the blink of an eye. The Waldorf Historia had become more than a hotel. It was a theater of contradictions, a palace built on exploitation, secrecy, and social stratification, a sanctuary for the elite where every indulgence was orchestrated and every risk calculated. It housed political power, financial speculation, illicit pleasure, and hidden tragedies, all under a veneer of effortless elegance. Every chandelier, every marble column, every dish served, every whispered transaction was both a symbol of mastery and a record of human cost. The hotel's splendor depended entirely on this hidden labor and silent complicity.
In the 1920s, the Waldorf Astoria stood as a monument to excess, discretion, and hubris, a gilded world balanced precariously between opulence and chaos, witnessing the triumphs and failures of a generation that believed wealth could conquer all, until the collapse revealed the frailty of even the grandest designs. By late October 1929, the festive atmosphere at the Waldorf Astoria had evaporated. The first tremors of financial disaster rippled through the gilded halls. Guests who had celebrated wealth and influence only days before now grappled with shock and despair. Black Thursday, October 24th, had delivered a merciless blow. The stock market crashed, fortunes vanished in hours, and panic spread through the city's elite like wildfire. Some guests abandoned their rooms immediately, unable to afford the nightly rates. Others lingered, clinging to a reality that no longer existed. Staff witnessed the rapid transformation of confident industrialists into hollow figures, slouched over in suites, barely eating, staring blankly at the walls that had once framed their opulence. The suicides surged. By November of 1929, 4 guests had ended their lives within the hotel, and December claimed 3 more. Methods ranged from gunshots and overdoses to leaps from windows. Each incident was handled with surgical discretion. Hotel management removed bodies quietly, sanitized the rooms, and readied them for new guests. Official explanations, accidental death or natural causes, shielded families and preserved the Waldorf's reputation. Newspapers complied, omitting details that might amplify the crisis or tarnish the hotel's allure. Economic collapse struck at the very foundation of the Waldorf Astoria. The wealthy patrons who had sustained the hotel for decades could no longer afford luxury suites, nor could corporations sponsor conventions or fund opulent banquets. Occupancy plummeted. Restaurant traffic declined, and by early 1930, less than half the rooms were filled, a historic low. Operating costs, however, remained rigid. In March 1930, the hotel enacted a 10% wage reduction across all staff. Workers, desperate to retain employment amid a national unemployment surge approaching 25%, endured the cut without protest. By July, another 10% reduction pushed many employees toward destitution. Families depended on charity to survive, as the hotel, which had once generated millions in profit, now extracted every possible penny from those who kept it functioning. The organized crime networks that had supplied illicit alcohol during Prohibition began scaling back operations. With fewer guests and reduced consumption, the Waldorf's role as a major client diminished. Protection payments continued, but volume and influence declined. The hotel remained connected to bootlegging networks, yet it no longer occupied the center stage of New York's underground liquor economy. Meanwhile, the property itself posed a growing dilemma. Occupying an entire block in Midtown Manhattan, the Waldorf Astoria sat on land whose value far outstripped the revenue generated by the aging hotel. By 1930, modern steel frame hotels eclipsed the Astoria in height, efficiency, and design. Its German Renaissance architecture, breathtaking in 1897, now seemed archaic. Fifth Avenue had transformed, department stores and office towers replaced private mansions, and the Waldorf stood as a relic of a bygone Gilded Age. The Astor family, owners of the property, had begun contemplating the land's potential even before the crash. In early 1929, Bethlehem Engineering Corporation approached them with a proposal: build the world's tallest building on the site, surpassing the Woolworth Building's 792-foot record.
The concept, a 1,000-foot tower requiring cutting-edge engineering, was revolutionary. Yet financing became uncertain following the October collapse, halting the deal.
A new buyer soon emerged. A syndicate led by former General Motors executive John Jacob Rasco and ex-New York Governor Al Smith envisioned a tower exceeding 1,200 feet, promising global prestige and record-breaking scale. The Astors agreed to sell in August 1929, months before the crash, for approximately $16 million, equivalent to roughly $280 million today. The agreement allowed the Waldorf to operate until construction could commence, though the crash delayed final financing. The hotel limped through late 1929 and into 1930, hosting guests amid uncertainty while the city's skyline and its own fate was about to be reshaped. The collapse had transformed the Waldorf Astoria into a stage where history, wealth, and desperation intersected. Rooms that once celebrated triumph now housed anxiety, despair, and quiet tragedy. Guests who had wielded power over markets and industries became powerless, confined to suites that had previously symbolized influence. Staff navigated corridors under the same roof, invisible yet essential, sustaining the illusion of grandeur while the world outside crumbled. The Waldorf's glittering chandeliers, ornate marble columns, and flawlessly executed service became a facade not only of luxury but of survival. Every polished surface, every meticulously prepared meal represented the labor of people living on the brink. The hotel, magnificent and monstrous, mirrored a society where opulence depended on exploitation, secrecy, and the relentless extraction of human effort. The Great Depression merely intensified this duality. The grandeur persisted even as its foundations shook. The Waldorf Astoria, in its final years under Astor ownership, epitomized contradiction, a monument to excess, a sanctuary of privilege, and a theater of despair. It was a place where fortunes evaporated overnight, where human suffering remained invisible behind gilded doors, and where a Gilded Age's legacy clung stubbornly to a rapidly changing city. The hotel had survived booms, busts, prohibition, and scandal, yet the economic and social upheaval of the 1930s would define its final chapter, setting the stage for the end of one era and the uncertain birth of another. The announcement that the Waldorf Astoria would close sent ripples through New York society. For over 3 decades, the hotel had been more than a building. It was an institution, the epicenter of social power, political intrigue, and gilded luxury. Its guest registers read like a ledger of American history. Presidents from Grover Cleveland onward, foreign dignitaries, captains of industry, and the city's most influential socialites. Its demolition signaled not merely the loss of a building, but the definitive closing of a chapter in the nation's cultural memory. The final season unfolded with a melancholic awareness. Guests arrived knowing they were walking through spaces that would soon vanish, experiencing the last glimpses of a world that had defined elegance and influence. The Waldorf scheduled its closing for May 3, 1929, a date later extended twice to accommodate final negotiations. The hotel officially shuttered on May 1, 1930. On April 30th, the Grand Ballroom hosted a farewell gala attended by over 1,500 guests. The air was thick with nostalgia. Speeches honored decades of history, while attendees shared memories of debutante balls, charity galas, political dinners, and private soirees. Each toast, each embrace was tinged with the realization that an era was ending, that the social tapestry carefully woven through the Waldorf's corridors was being unraveled.
Yet behind the gilded celebrations, the human cost of the closure was immediate and severe. Over 1,000 staff members, long-serving maids, waiters, bellhops, chefs, and porters faced unemployment in the nation's worst economic climate. The Great Depression had already begun, and jobs in New York's contracting hotel industry were scarce.
Severance pay was non-existent. Final wages were all the hotel could offer. Generations of workers who had sustained the Waldorf's luxury now confronted destitution. Some found employment at the new Waldorf Historia, under construction on Park Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets, set to open in October 1931. That modern structure, taller and designed in Art Deco style, would be corporate rather than family-run, a distant cousin in name only. Most of the old staff did not transition. For them, the closing was absolute. Demolition preparations began almost immediately. The Charles Strobel Company, specialists in dismantling monumental structures, moved in on October 1, 1930, the day after the hotel closed. Crews systematically stripped the building of anything salvageable before wrecking began. Chandeliers were carefully removed and auctioned, fetching surprising sums despite the depression. Marble paneling, mahogany woodwork, bronze fixtures, and decorative plaster were salvaged, catalogued, and warehoused for resale. As workers pried away the layers of grandeur, the Waldorf Historia revealed secrets that had remained hidden for decades. Sealed rooms emerged behind walls that had never appeared on floor plans. One contained furniture and personal effects seemingly abandoned by a guest decades prior. Another revealed clandestine bootlegging equipment from the Prohibition-era. Letters, receipts, and documents surfaced in forgotten nooks, shedding light on activities management had worked hard to conceal. Every layer of dismantled architecture told a story, uncovering the invisible lives that had intersected with the hotel's glittering facade. Actual demolition commenced in January 1931. Crews worked from the top floors downward, dismantling the iconic German Renaissance towers that had dominated Fifth Avenue for more than 30 years. Exterior walls were reduced floor by floor, marble facades crumbled into rubble. Dust clouds enveloped surrounding buildings, covering the streets in a haze that symbolized both the end of the Waldorf and the passing of an era. Complaints from nearby residents about noise and debris were largely ignored, a testament to the scale and inevitability of the operation. The process carried bitter irony for some. Among the demolition crews were sons and nephews of the very men who had built the Waldorf Astoria decades earlier. Trades passed from father to son in immigrant communities, and now the next generation was tasked with dismantling what their fathers had raised. Bricks once lifted to soaring heights now fell in pieces into waiting trucks. Mahogany railings that had guided aristocrats down polished corridors were broken down and loaded onto carts. The grandeur of labor's past met the labor of finality, each swing of a hammer echoing both memory and erasure. By the spring of 1931, the Waldorf Astoria had vanished entirely. Where once towers gleamed above Fifth Avenue, rubble and dust remained. Its demolition marked the tangible end of the Gilded Age's social and architectural vision. What had been a stage for wealth, power, indulgence, and secrecy now existed only in photographs, newspaper clippings, and the memories of those who had walked its halls. The Waldorf Astoria's legacy would endure as a testament to ambition and excess, and as a reminder of the invisible labor and human stories upon which that gilded fantasy had been built. During breaks at the demolition site, workers often spoke in quiet tones about the ironies of their labor. Fathers had hoisted steel beams and lifted marble panels decades earlier. Now sons and nephews dismantled the same structures. The conversation was fatalistic, not bitter. Buildings rose, buildings fell. Workers endured what was necessary to survive.
By May 1931, the Waldorf Astoria had vanished. The grand towers, the intricate German Renaissance facades, and every decorative flourish that had crowned the pinnacle of American luxury had been reduced to debris or sold for salvage. Only the foundations remained, soon to be excavated for the Empire State Building's subterranean levels. For a brief moment, the lot sat empty, a void in the Manhattan streetscape where a landmark had dominated for 33 years. Construction of the Empire State Building began almost immediately. March 1931 saw steel framework climbing at an astonishing pace, 4.5 stories per week, an audacious schedule reflecting both technological innovation and human ambition. Despite the ongoing Great Depression, the project demonstrated that American enterprise could achieve extraordinary feats. By November 1931, the steel skeleton reached its full 1,250-foot height. The limestone and granite cladding followed, and on May 1, 1931, exactly 1 year after the Waldorf Astoria closed, the building opened to the public. It claimed the world's tallest building title at 1,250 feet to the roof and 1,454 feet to the tip of the antenna, towering above the very site where the Waldorf Astoria had once served society's elite. The timing, however, was cruel. The opening coincided with the deepest trough of the Depression. Occupancy remained low, never exceeding 25% in the 1930s. The upper floors sat largely empty, and New Yorkers mockingly dubbed it the empty state building. The contrast with the original hotel could not have been starker. The original hotel had been a family endeavor, built with inherited wealth to serve social ambition and personal grandeur. Every coffered ceiling, every marble column, every banquet hall was a stage for display and hierarchy.
The Empire State Building was entirely different, a corporate venture engineered to generate maximum rental income. One celebrated excess, the other celebrated efficiency. One embodied spectacle, the other measured success in square feet and cash flow. Meanwhile, the new Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue opened in October 1931. Rising 47 stories, its Art Deco design reflected contemporary tastes rather than the German Renaissance excess of its predecessor. Architects Schulze and Weaver approached the project with precision, prioritizing operational efficiency and profitability over theatrical grandeur. Room layouts were standardized for easier maintenance. Mechanical systems were centralized and accessible. Kitchens occupied entire floors with modern equipment. Staff areas were carefully designed for workflow efficiency. The new building succeeded where the Fifth Avenue property would have failed, delivering comfort, luxury, and service at a profit. Yet something intangible was lost. The original Waldorf Astoria had been impractical, excessive, and unapologetically ostentatious. Its very extravagance, grand ballrooms, soaring ceilings, elaborate decor made it legendary. The new hotel was technically excellent, commercially brilliant, and professionally managed, but it lacked the audacity that had defined its predecessor. It provided superior accommodations and flawless service, yet it offered no theater, no spectacle, no sense of living history. It was a hotel built for function, not fantasy. And the human cost of the original hotel was almost entirely erased from memory. Workers who had built the Waldorf Astoria, lifting bricks to dizzying heights, assembling intricate plasterwork, hauling marble and mahogany, vanished from historical record. Those who died during construction were never counted. Their labor and sacrifices, the foundation of the hotel's luxury and reputation, existed only in the shadows of the building itself. The Waldorf Astoria had been magnificent and monstrous simultaneously, a gilded palace erected through the toil and, in many cases, suffering of invisible hands.
The Empire State Building and the Park Avenue Waldorf Astoria would rise, strong, modern, and commercially successful, but neither would carry the mythos, the excess,
or the human drama that made the original an icon of American ambition, opulence, and contradiction. The Waldorf Astoria stood as a monument to wealth, taste, and social ambition, yet the hands that built and maintained it were deliberately erased from history. Maids who scrubbed floors on their knees, hauling water and polishing marble. Kitchen workers who endured punishing shifts to produce flawless service. Porters who lifted heavy luggage for the elite. Maintenance crews who climbed dizzying heights to maintain chandeliers. None left memoirs. They were systematically excluded from the stories that celebrated the hotel's grandeur. Published histories focused instead on presidents, foreign dignitaries, and the social elite who filled the rooms and ballrooms. The human cost, the lives spent in labor and silence, was erased. The same applied to tragedy. Over 40 guests took their own lives within the hotel, often under circumstances shrouded in discretion and quiet complicity. Families shielded reputations, management ensured discretion, and newspapers quietly omitted the details. Suicides vanished from public memory with the same efficiency that maintained gilded appearances. Later generations inherited a story of elegance, not despair. Labor exploitation, the failed strikes, the women subjected to harassment, the children working illegally, was omitted. Magnificence demanded forgetting the suffering that produced it, and the Waldorf Astoria, by design and convenience, achieved exactly that.
Even the hotel's entanglement with crime was sanitized. Bootlegging operations during Prohibition, protection payments to criminal networks, occasional violent enforcement, all were reframed as minor anecdotes, charming period detail rather than evidence of systematic corruption. The stabbing of a liquor supplier in 1923 became a story told for intrigue, not a record of deadly consequence. Selective memory transformed complicity into color, concealment into legend, and the hotel's dark history was buried beneath layers of nostalgia. Cultural memory, therefore, retained only the glamour. Chandeliers shimmering above ballrooms, marble floors polished to a mirror, dining tables groaning with delicacies, the presence of titans of society. The Waldorf Astoria became a symbol of elegance, sophistication, and the Gilded Age at its most spectacular. Nostalgia was genuine, yet incomplete. Spectacular as it had been, the hotel was built on family spite, maintained through exploitation, and utilized by guests whose comfort came at the expense of others. The Empire State Building that would rise on the same lot inherited none of this human complexity or moral ambiguity. It represented technological achievement, corporate ambition, and the triumph of rational design, existing in a world that bore little resemblance to the theatrical social cosmos of the 19th century. The physical remnants of the Waldorf Astoria were scattered across the country. Chandeliers illuminated private homes in Connecticut, marble paneling adorned bank lobbies in Philadelphia, mahogany and plaster decorations found new life in collections and buildings far removed from Fifth Avenue. Objects that once defined the hotel's identity were dispersed, existing in isolation, stripped of their original narrative context. They became fragments, silent witnesses to grandeur and suffering alike. The stories that endured were similarly fragmented. Old New Yorkers recalled attending lavish dinners, elaborate balls, and events graced by presidents and industrial magnates. They spoke of excitement, opulence, and the thrill of witnessing society's elite in their element. These recollections were true, but incomplete. They omitted the foundation of labor and exploitation upon which the spectacle rested. The glamour was remembered, the cost largely forgotten.
Ultimately, the Waldorf Historia's legacy is irreducibly complex. It embodied extraordinary achievement in architecture, hospitality, and social orchestration. Its construction required technical skill, artistic vision, and coordinated labor on an unprecedented scale. Its operation demanded meticulous management, balancing elite expectations, clandestine indulgence, and systematic oversight. Yet it also bore witness to suffering, silence, and moral compromise, the invisible cost of magnificence. In the collective imagination, the Waldorf Historia lives as a monument to a bygone era, a site of ambition, excess, and social hierarchy. It symbolizes the extremes of human aspiration, the elegance of taste, and the spectacle of wealth. But beneath that polished surface lies a shadowed history of labor and exploitation, of suicide and secrecy, of crime and complicity. The hotel's story is therefore not a simple tale of triumph, but a layered narrative of beauty and brutality, memory and omission, wonder and human cost, a legacy as dazzling as it was morally complex. The Waldorf Historia's social function was undeniable. For over 3 decades, it hosted presidents, dignitaries, and captains of industry. Balls, galas, and private dinners staged the rhythm of New York society. That grandeur was real, tangible, and breathtaking. But it was a spectacle built on foundations of exploitation, exclusion, and inequality. Workers died erecting its steel frame. Maids scrubbed floors until their hands cracked and bled. Immigrant laborers endured endless hours under punishing conditions. Luxury for the few required suffering for the many.
The exclusion of Black Americans, the subjugation of women, and the rigid hierarchy imposed on immigrant staff were not unfortunate side effects. They were central to the hotel's operation. Its opulence was inseparable from oppression. The Waldorf Astoria embodied both magnificence and monstrousness. The two were intertwined, symbiotic, impossible to separate. Its beauty and its brutality coexisted, creating a legacy both dazzling and morally complex. For 33 years, the hotel represented a vision of American life where wealth justified itself through display and excess. That vision produced artistry, grand ballrooms, shimmering chandeliers, and flawless service, but also systematic suffering. Forgetting either aspect distorts the truth. The building is gone. Workers and guests alike have passed. The social world it served has vanished. What remains is memory, contested and incomplete. Some recall wonder, others remember cost. Both are true. The marble, gold leaf, and mahogany are scattered or destroyed, yet the questions the Waldorf Astoria raised endure. What does it mean for comfort to depend on the exploitation of others? How does society reconcile beauty and labor, luxury and injustice? These questions persist in every gilded lobby, every luxury suite, every institution where privilege thrives on inequality. The Waldorf Astoria vanished in 1930, but its lessons, of brilliance shadowed by brutality, remain alive.